the needs of the Syrian refugees and their hosts. It's the platform joined by the UN agencies, the hosting government, international NGOs, and all kinds of stakeholders and players. Before we start this event, just a few housekeeping issues. So the language will be in English. Unfortunately, we don't have Arabic translation. The time, we're a bit squeezed with the time because we are hoping for a very rich discussion. And we have very significant guests here who all have something to say, and we're hoping to get from this event as much as possible. So we will need to be a bit disciplined with the time frames and the time slots appointed for the different speakers. We are going to be recording the session, and it's going to be streamed. So I hope everybody is aware of that. For providing comments from the floor, online participants will not have access to the chat box. Now, during the Q&A session, we instead ask online participants to raise their hands virtually, and the organizing team will manage muting and unmuting. I think the last thing I would love to say is that this event is organized by the co-leads of the 3RP, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and the United Nations Development Program. And so as such, this event will be co-chaired by UNHCR and UNDP, and we are hosted here in the UNDP premises. Without further ado, I now have the pleasure to introduce the co-chairs, Dr. Abdallah Dardari, who is the director of the Regional Bureau of Arab States at UNDP. He's based in New York, and he has assumed many senior roles within the UN organizations and outside in government organizations and multinational organizations. And we have with us Ayman Gharaibi. He is the director for the Middle East and North Africa Regional Bureau for UNHCR. I'm going to excuse myself with all the speakers because since we are squeezed with the time, I am going to try not to go into the CVs of every speaker because we want to try to focus on the dynamics of the discussion, all the interventions, try to make this a really useful discussion to discuss lessons learned and how do we manage the new landscape. It's been 13 years on the Syria crisis. Challenges are only mounting, and funding is decreasing. Difficulties and different crises are also contributing to adding difficulties to refugees' lives and host governments. And so we really need to think together on how can we work most efficiently and with all kinds of contributions from the different groups. So I give the floor to Dr. Dardari. Good morning.
Good morning. Rula, it's always a pleasure to see you. Ayman, my partner in crime. Great to be here with you today. This is in fact my first 3RP event since I started this job, while Ayman is a veteran and he knows the subject matter, and everyone around this table know the subject matter much more than I do. So please bear with me my ignorance. I have few words to say, even though, of course, we have a set of notes, but let me just say that we are meeting here today, and we know we are going through a difficult time in the whole region, but that doesn't mean we don't keep the focus on Syrian refugees. We need to keep the focus on Syrian refugees because they are they represent a pressure on the resources of their host communities and host countries, and it is their right to receive assistance. At the same time, it's the right of the host countries also to receive assistance. And the more we streamline and the more we prioritize, the better. We understand the funding situation globally, but we cannot take our eyes off the Syrian refugee crisis because we don't need additional pressures in the region. We have enough. So when we talk about Syrian refugees and the 3RP continuing and providing the services it has been provided, it is I believe, is a global public good. And as any other global public good, the global community should invest in it. And therefore, we are here today to speak very loudly that we cannot have our eyes off the Syrian refugee question, and we cannot reduce funding for the Syria refugee question because we cannot afford any more social pressures and tensions in the region. The other point I would like to say, and I'd like to thank my predecessors in this position, and of course, my brother Ayman, who has been really doing a fantastic job co-leading, and Abdullah and the team. This is a unique setup. We have 207 institutions working together. And that is by itself the success of coordinating, the success of optimizing the work of 207 parties, large and small, governmental, intergovernmental, international, NGOs, and national NGOs, and so on. That is by itself an experience that has also become a global public good, and that we need to preserve. And not because the self-interest of this group is to sustain the crisis, not at all. We need to preserve the experience that we can use in other places. Now we are going to Egypt to work together in a similar situation for the Sudanese refugees. That is, by the way, so this is an asset, what we have been building together here, that we should not abandon. And the last point is, I would like to say that we are very grateful for the donors. They have already given the Syrian refugees and the host community more than $24 billion over the last 10 years. Now, that is also an excellent investment. And maybe one day, historians will sit down and analyze what would have the cost of inaction be if we did not step in and contributed those $24 billion. As an economist, I can already think of few alternative scenarios for what could have happened to the region and to the world if that investment was not made. So the return on this investment, I can assure you, as an economist and as a development professional of 38 years in this field, I can assure you it's a very good return on investment. So don't reduce your investment when it is making a very good return on investment. So we are grateful for the donors, we are grateful for the partners, we are grateful for the host countries, governments, and societies and communities, those incredible people who offer generosity unparalleled. And we sometimes tend to forget that. What the Jordanians and the Lebanese and the Turks and the Iraqis and the Egyptians have done for Syrian refugees with all the noises that you hear is actually a historical experience that should be put in that lens. So we are grateful for the host communities. And if you allow me, as a Syrian citizen, I would like to express my personal gratitude for that generosity in host communities. And also I would like to praise the resilience of the Syrian refugees, who have historically and now been a contribution to the societies they came to, from Brazil and Argentina, all the way now to Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey. We see industries mushrooming. We see an increase of 5% in agricultural land in Lebanon, because there is a capable working group that can do this. So finally, just if we put all of these things together, this is a successful experience. And I would like again to thank all of you for being with us here today. And we will continue the partnership to make sure that the gains are not lost. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, floor is yours.
you, Dr. Abdullah, and good morning to you all. I was pleased to see Dr. Abdullah from UNDP speaking the language of UNHCR, so we've come a long way.
Told you, because partners in crime.
I thought UNDP would be said, well, thank you, Dr. Abdullah. You've stolen half of my points, but it's a pleasure to see you in person. We have not seen each other except on TV. And it's quite remarkable when you said a Syrian, then I'm a Jordanian, and Adele is a Lebanese. I think probably at least there are people who are born and raised in this region and dealing with its crisis. So we're fully aware of its sensibilities and complexity and cultural and other issues that come to play in this region. I think much has been said in terms of the recognition to everybody, both the partners, the host states, the donor community that has been with us. The 3RP is a plan that has been quite popular in different regards by these three different groups. It's continued to be recognized as an example that could be repeated where it is the situation fit for purpose. I think Sudan was a Sudan situation rather than taking country by country. I think most donor states would like to see a central strategic platform where they can see all the needs, contributions in a very open source manner in order for them to take their informed decision accordingly. So in whatever shape and form the future will have for the 3RP, it's certainly the experience and the lessons learned will transfer to other parts. But let's go a bit to the mechanics of where we are today in this 3RP process. 13 years into this crisis. I certainly, when I started dealing with the Syria crisis after leaving Damascus in 2012, I did not know that we would be sitting here in 2024 talking about the same issues, refugee needs and how we meet. 2023, honestly, has been a bad year for the humanitarian aid workers. We started Syria and Turkey with the earthquake, if you remember, which brought us into a different level of operationality since it's a natural disaster. It ironically created certain openings that we have seen within Syria, within the government, within certain areas, access and so on. Then, of course, the region reminded us that we are impacted with whatever happens elsewhere. So we've had Sudan just 2 months later, and before the year ended, we ended up with the war in Gaza. All of these have, and any other crisis in the region will continue to add more pressure, not on us, on the host states, clearly. And this region continued to bubble with problems that is protracted, and any resolution to these crises is eluding even countries in this world. But not to make it all doom and gloom, and before we get to the figures, because that's where actually the reality hits the ground, let me just highlight a few of the successes. I'm happy Adele is in front of me on screen because it's about education. I think Syrians are one of these nations that attach enormous value to education. Those of you who worked in Syria know that very well. Those of you who dealt with Syrian refugees outside know that very well. And we have been also grateful for states who have opened their education systems and revised their policies to accommodate these students, because that's short of any durable solution or return to Syria. Our only hope in the future is obviously the education. And we'll get to hear from Firas later, who's representing that. Everything what I'm going to say is represented in one Syrian gentleman who's going to be on the panel with us. One of these examples really has been, for example, Egypt. 42,000 of the Syrian students have been fully integrated, accommodated, and provided support in the Egyptian schools without any impediments. The other example that often we cite is really the Iraq KRI example where the Syrians in Erbil and the other main cities in northern Iraq has been fully integrated. Not only them receiving education, but the regional government there has also allowed the Syrian teachers to be part of that education system. So in a way, we provided education and a job opportunity for the teachers to do their national duty towards their citizens and be part of that success story. There would be, we will hear some of these details from Faraz later on the panel, but let me just go quickly to two main points and I'll be very short. Just to remind us where we are in terms of the funding figures. 2023 has been the lowest year in terms of financial contributions. Funded at 30%. The previous year, 2022, it was 39%. This year, all the signs and signals that it's going to be even lower than that. So the trajectory and trends are quite clear. And the writing has been on the wall, at least for us in the humanitarian world, quite clear, simply because the global pressure on humanitarian funding in every government, to be fair also to our donors. So the signals this could send is not only just sliding back on programs we have achieved, cutting off families from the WFP food distribution or from the cash assistance to UNHCR. It's also sending, the signal that the notion that we are with you in this crisis as host states is being questioned. The notion of stay the course until this crisis is over or reaching an agreed finality is a major concern, particularly in Jordan and Lebanon, who feel the biggest pressure. There's also the message that the Syrian refugees are getting. They certainly feel a sense of abandonment when they see significant reduction, not only from one agency, but across the board, because we all are funded by the same donors from the same funding pots. It's important to also prioritize here the issue of the prioritization. I know we have been involved. This is more for the practitioners of the 3RP. We have been able to reduce the total budget requirement for the 3RP by 1 billion, which is now stands at 4.9 from the 5.9 the previous year. I think this has been requested by donors, by some of the agencies who have debated within them whether it would continue make any added value to continue ask for a bigger amount than actually what the annual contribution comes to these states. We have not done this across the board. We have left it to the liberty of each agency to decide within its own donor relations dynamics on whether they're going to reduce or not. So those who have reduced in accumulative terms brought down the total ask by 1 billion. This is an exercise that will continue this year. We have no other choice. In a declining funding slope, we need to look into how best to use the available resources within a prioritized plan. And as I said, it's really left to the agency to define within their sector, country, where this prioritization would make sense and provide the efficiencies. Quickly on the figures, all of you know that there is no change in the figures. It remains within 6 million refugees outside, 6 million affected host communities. So almost 12 to closely to 13 million people that the plan will target. I just want to, when we talk about populations, these figures sometimes may not mean much, but I just want to mention one thing that we are seeing over the years. When a crisis continues for 10 years, you see a generation shift. So that Syrian family that came with 4 kids 12 years ago, these 4 kids, 7, 10, 12, they're now married and have their own small families. When we asked them in the intention survey, how do you see the future, the return to Syria? Well, these these families have never stepped foot in Syria. What do you think the answer is going to be? This is the danger of really losing the connection between refugees and their country. And therefore, it undermines our advocacy in saying that return is the ultimate solution for any refugee population. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. So Ayman was my boss, so I couldn't cut him short. I will cut anyone else. We have to. Thank you both for Dr. Dardari and Ayman for laying the ground. We're going to start a panel discussion now. And it's really very timely. We are looking at a 13-year-old crisis. We have multiple crises in the region that are having an impact on the refugees, on the host countries. We have growing needs, limited funding, decreasing funding, and yet the needs are really the cost of inaction, as Dr. Dardari said, is increasing. So how can we learn from the past 13 years to try to navigate this very complex, difficult terrain and still protect and support Syrian refugees and assist the host communities as well, so that they can continue with the journey? I will start with Ms. Polly Benner from the World Bank. She is the World Bank representative here in Jordan, and she has a long experience in development action. So I will stop there, and I'll ask you a quick question. The World Bank has expanded its engagement and work to support economic stability in the countries affected by the Syria crisis. Now, given the multi-layered crisis and increasing needs, where does the World Bank see the role of its innovative financing mechanism like the GCFF, which we would love to hear more about, to continue addressing and catering to the complex needs of Syrian refugees, host communities? How can the World Bank play a role with national governments to ensure effective services, delivery, and socioeconomic inclusion for those who are forced to be displaced and become refugees?
So much.
Okay. Actually,
It's
we
okay.
only,
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, first, Ayman and Dr. Abdullah, and to UNHCR and UNDP for your leadership on the 3RP. And I agree, I think in a way there is a global public good in having this type of platform and engagement. And I think there's always opportunity in crisis, and the ability for humanitarian and development actors also to come together around the engagement, I think in and of itself is an important step forward, I think, in our response. So I will try to respond to your sets of questions and in 4 minutes. In 4 minutes. And I wanted to say a couple of things. I think one is we recently released our World Development Report, our annual development report on refugees, migration, and forced displacement. And one of the key findings there and focus is to think about these protracted refugee crises as a development challenge, right, in and of themselves. And I think we all see the reality of declining assistance, and I think it challenges us to think more on the efficiency and sustainability of how we work together and support host countries. And in terms of our response in the region, in Lebanon and Jordan, I wanted to, in particular, zoom in on the role of the Global Concessional Financing Facility, because I think this has very much enabled us to support this type of development approach to the crisis. So, and I'll use the example of Jordan because it's one that I know the best, but just to say that the GCFF, which has been in existence the last 7 years, so has provided about 500 million in support to Jordan across a range of sectors. And that 500 million in concessional finance has enabled over $3 billion in MDB financing. So we've been able through the GCFF to basically provide support to refugees and host communities as part of broader development programming. And let me give you a few examples of that. For example, on education services in Jordan, where the Jordanians are providing double shift schools to refugees. The ability of having that GCFF financing has enabled over 162,000 refugee children to be a part of the education system here. And it's also enabled us to invest in the quality of education services. So I think this kind of win-win approach, providing development support to host communities, but also to refugees was enabled. Likewise, in Lebanon, GCFF financing helped on COVID-19 vaccination support, which benefited both Lebanese and refugee populations. And we've also in Jordan focused as well on how to support Syrian refugees' access to the labor market. So I think Jordan has been quite progressive in providing jobs and livelihood opportunities for Syrian refugees in limited sectors, but it's if you compare this to the counterfactual of refugees being in camps and being fully supported by international assistance, there's a huge efficiency and cost savings if refugees can be self-reliant and actually contribute to host economies. So GCFF support has also enabled us to bring refugees into livelihood programming and jobs programming. And then maybe last but not least, as an example, we also know Jordan has put forward this refugee climate nexus initiative at COP27 and is also, of course, one of the most water scarce countries in the world. We've been able, through GCFF support, to also provide water services and support in communities that are hosting large numbers of refugees. So again, increasing quality of services and access both for host communities and refugees. So I think this idea of utilizing development support, but with a focus on vulnerable populations, including refugees, allows us to sort of adapt and think about the efficiency and sustainability of how we provide our support moving forward. And I think there's some very good lessons from the Jordan experience on this. And I think we're also at a moment, the GCFF, the MENA window is very low right now. So I think we need to think moving forward in terms of financing support. How do we really hone in on supporting host governments in these win-win approaches that allows for improved service delivery, but also promotes refugees' self-reliance and contribution to host economies. So these were just a few thoughts, I hope, within my 3 minutes on how we can concretely think about next steps on the partnership.
Thank you, and you are so concise that I can ask you a very quick question, because you spoke how on the need of adapting, utilizing, and being efficient. In a very short answer, what's your main challenge?
So maybe I could also note, because we're working right now on our new 5-year country strategy for Jordan, and what we're proposing is that refugees supporting Jordan as a refugee host and a provider of global public goods becomes a cross-cutting focus area. So we'll think about jobs and employment and improved human capital and climate and resilience, but across all of our work, we would want to really have this inclusion and support to refugees embedded. So I think, to answer your question, for me, the challenge is how do we embed in middle income countries this type of concessional support that incentivizes, recognizes the global public good that these governments are providing and gives them the opportunity to really build national systems, strengthen those, but also have this refugee support embedded. So I think the GCFF model is an excellent one in that regard, and I know many of you are supporting it. I think this type, adapting and trying to have more predictable support over multi-years, is also really critically important if we want to take it on as a development challenge.
Thank you very much. That was very useful, and I think there are a lot of hopes on even a bigger role and from the World Bank and such institutions. Our next speaker is Ms. Adele Khoudour. She is the Regional Director for UNICEF in the Middle East and North Africa and has a 30 years experience with UNICEF. Without much delay, I will ask her very quick 2 questions because there's a lot that we can learn from UNICEF experience as they address the needs of the most vulnerable and the most at stake because it's the children and the future for not only Syria but also the region. Dear Adele, reflecting on the 13 years of crisis, how has UNICEF approach evolved in addressing the complex needs of children and youth affected by the crisis, whether they are Syrian refugees or members of the host community? Specifically, could you highlight innovative partnerships that UNICEF had taken and had proved very successful and we can learn from?
Thank you very much, Rasha, and good morning, Sabah khair to everyone. I'm sorry for not being physically there. It has been a busy morning since 7:30, and this is why I couldn't be with you. I think maybe before I talk specifically about the examples that we are happy to share, I just want to follow up on what Abdullah and Ayman have been mentioning to say that this year we are really in the 13th year of the Syria crisis, but we also have big challenges in the operating environment in the region, you know, with especially with the crisis in Gaza, which has also affected the neighboring countries like Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And it's not a coincidence, it is a coincidence, in fact, that the 3 of us are coming from each of these 3 countries. But if we put really that aside, I think that the current situation has really put additional strains on us and complexities at a time where the resources are going down, as was mentioned by Ayman, or they are becoming more tied to strict conditions. So often we are having to deal with these multiple situations and have to make hard choices, you know, whether in terms of ensuring that we deal with all these vulnerable groups in the same way. I mean, we cannot talk about those impacted by the crisis in Gaza and forget about the Syrian refugees. We have to maintain a certain level of balance and equity in what we deal with these different groups. Otherwise, it's going to really impact the social cohesion and the stability of some countries, like is the situation in Lebanon today, for example, which is the most acute, I would say, but even could happen in Jordan as well, or we could be starting. So I think to see it. So I think it is really very important that we look at what's happening and we look at the Syrian crisis in this perspective of how, through our work, we do not create more differences and disparities between these groups, and how do we not create a competition between them and between how to address each one of them. I think the minimum is that the resources should stay at the same level. Otherwise, if we fail that now, then we will be really undermining what we have been doing for many years, and we could also be contributing to social instability in many instances. So I think just a question of, you know, talking about the future and what could happen. Now, when it comes to your specific questions, I would like to provide a few examples highlighting our approach, which has been also a joint approach with many partners, including, of course, our colleagues in UNHCR, but also Save the Children and other partners. The approach of UNICEF to the humanitarian development nexus, or doing the 2, emphasizes really strengthening systems to achieve sustainable outcomes for children. And in the context of the Syrian crisis, we have really focused a lot on how we can build the national capacities and the resilience of national systems and institutions to reach all the vulnerable children and their families, including those in the host communities, of course, and to increase the sustainability of programming by working through the national systems. And Our approach has really focused a lot on interventions and programs that focus on vulnerability rather than status or nationality. And this is the attention to both the refugee and the host community, which is critical to maintain the social cohesion at the community level. And that's really very, very important. So maybe a few examples in Jordan. We have phased out most of the international partnerships, and we are
Adele,
investing.
sorry.
Yes.
I have just to remind you that actually we're nearing that our time is up. So it's an appeal. If you can make it in time for time slot designated to your intervention, please.
Yes, for sure.
Sorry,
So,
apologies.
No worries.
She's not.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about the cost because we are not operating in a vacuum, and this is why I took time. But of course, I just want to say that we have the Makani program in Jordan, I think, which everybody probably knows about, that engages the Syrian incentive-based volunteers and who really work on issues related to water and sanitation in camps, but they also have these youth centers and they oversee the school operations. So that's one big example. But I also want to say that we are being forced to close down 20% of those centers because the funding is going down. So whatever we had built is at also risk, although many of it we are trying to also encourage the government to take more, but you all know the story as well of the increasing pressures on the Jordan government. In Lebanon also, we have an approach of multi-service community centers that provide holistic services, including education, child protection, early child development, life skills training, and youth engagement support. And in Iraq, I would like to mention as well the experience that Ayman has mentioned, which is in partnership with UNHCR and Save the Children for the refugee education integration policy in Kurdistan region. And we are currently in the process of moving all the refugees out of this parallel refugee education systems and bringing them all into the regular education system of the Kurdistan region government. Maybe I will have the chance more to talk later about more details on the Lebanon experience. But over to you since time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sadly, what you have conveyed is tragic, because with every child that is losing a chance to be educated, it's a lot of grave consequences for the child and for the society. So we turn now to Mr. Robert McIntyre. He is he joins us from the U.S. Embassy Amman's Refugee Coordination Team. And he is the regional coordinator for the refugee situation, PRM, and he's been working on similar issues and platforms before. And I think we have heard from all the speakers a very tragic reality. As Adele mentioned, refugees are having to make hard choices. Humanitarian agencies are making hard choices. It's very hard to choose who is most vulnerable and who will be deprived of assistance. And there's an appeal that the resources stay the course. Is that possible? How is PRM adapting to all these emerging crises in the region and beyond? How are you going to be able to sustain the support to Syrian refugees, which PRM have and the US have done since the onset of this crisis?
All very important and very challenging questions. I'll just start by saying on the 3RP in general, one of the questions that was posed to me ahead of time was how we use this plan and how it's useful. It is extremely useful, I think, from our donor perspective, in the sense that it's a one-stop shop. You have the needs of all the Syrians around the region, the various players in there, and I think just to say that I think it has been useful to our side in terms of funding over the years. I certainly don't don't see that changing. Ayman had mentioned prioritization, that there's been some push on the UN to prioritize. Part of that push has been from us. I know prioritization has always been very important from a Washington perspective, because at the end of the day, when funding is limited, who do you want to make? Who do you think should be making these decisions? I mean, I think the idea is UN experts on the ground have the granularity, have the expertise to be able to say, all right, this is slightly more important than this. Ideally, of course, everything would get funded. But in the reality of our world, I think the sense is better for the UN to make these priority decisions than for funders far away in Washington or Berlin or Tokyo. Well, I shouldn't speak for other donors in the room, but I think our sense is the UN is there, the experts are there on the ground. You know what the needs are, and having that all prioritized is very helpful. Versus, having our accountants just say it's going to be this much off the top. One thing we've talked about that is a priority on our side has been the idea of solutions from the start. I know this particular crisis has been going on for over a decade, but the idea of integrating the humanitarian response with the development response as early as possible. We can't wait until year 10, year 11, year 12 to start talking about these solutions. And I know we haven't in the Syria response. We've been talking about the integration of development and humanitarian solutions for many years, but this needs to be fundamental to all the work that we're doing, because as time goes by, this part of the response is not going away. I will just say sort of a final note on budget. Our budget is declining. I think we work, and most or all donors work in essentially a political environment, and I think that's something for everyone to keep in mind, that we're as donors, we're not just specifically making the decisions about which population is more vulnerable than the other one. Where the funders are essentially making political decisions about the priorities for our countries, and I don't want to. I don't think I can underestimate the importance of making the argument to our capitals about the need to about the effects that these situations have on stability, on economies, on security. As much as I would like to think that the moral argument will win the day of saying it's the right thing to do and we must fund all of these circumstances full stop. At the end of the day, I think it becomes a better argument to say, and here are the economic consequences, and here are the security consequences, and here are the consequences on all these other aspects that are of importance to donors. And so I don't think, I just put that out there, from the perspective of one of many donors, to say that making these arguments back to our capitals is quite important. That's part of what I do every day, is just to say, here's what we're seeing on the ground. Here's what needs to be done. But I try and frame it in language that I think my colleagues in Washington, the funders, the elected representatives, the policymakers can kind of really see it, to paint that picture, to put it into the context of everything else that they're looking at. Because I know that they're looking at Sudan crisis and Ukraine and everything else that's happening. So just a plug to not ignore that framing, which at the end of the day is political, but is also, that's the world that we're coming from when we're making these decisions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The Refugee Coordinator of the United States Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration. Now, you have outlined two things. One of the main approaches that you favor is the integration and inclusion. But unfortunately, in the past few years, this approach has proven to be one of the most elusive, as humanitarian agencies and all those who work on the 3RP tried to push for. It's a very complex approach and very difficult, especially in the context of Lebanon and Turkey. So I think, and yet you're saying it's the preferred approach. So we have to find a way on how to make this happen. The second thing is you're telling us we have to advocate more. To advocate more on the cost of inaction. So I think you've just given us another task and we will try to work on.
Thank you.
Our last speaker for this panel session is sorry, we lost it. Giovanni. So Giovanni is the representative for the Syrian International NGOs Regional Forum, SIRF, and he has a lot to say because we're working with so many partners, international NGOs, local NGOs who are on the ground delivering, in touch with the refugees and with what's feasible, what's real, what are the passages. So we'd love to hear from you. And the question is that civil society organizations play a critical role in the 3RP, advocacy to implementation and everything in between. How are the civil society bodies are adapting their strategies to remain impactful in the evolving Syrian crisis landscape? And how do you ensure meaningful local partnerships that will help with this approach? From you, and if you can please.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you very much. First of all, and very quickly, I have a disclaimer because I'm not from the region and I'm representing the civil society, which is very unsettling for me. But I'm sure that there will be interventions also from the floor from local organizations, and I hope please come up with that. As civil society organizations, we always look at processes that impact the life of the people that you're supposed to serve. And I think the most important process that can influence the life of Syrians inside Syria, but also outside Syria, is a political solution. This is also mentioned in the 3RPs, and I think this is also something that is very important to mention here. The more far we get from a political solution, the more far we get from a final solution also to solve the problems of the Syrians here. And also, the more the time passes, Ayman has mentioned that there are social also processes and events that impact the willingness of some of the Syrians to return into their own countries. And this is very important. So while we get far from this political solution, we have to focus on alternative solutions as civil society. And we cannot see alternative solutions without looking at inclusion of Syrians in the different countries. And we have seen also, and Ayman and Dr. Tardari also mentioned, how the civil societies of the hosting countries have been playing a very important role in that. So inclusion is extremely important. And we, as civil society organization, or as INGOs, it's what we do maybe better, is connecting the civilians and people in need with our programming that normally are supposed to solve, at least temporary their problems. To do that, we need to have a conducive environment. That conducive environment passes through few things that we'll mention quickly to make sure interventions from the public take place. The first one is, of course, policy. And this is where we also want to make sure that, and I know you understand, colleagues, but the burden that the co-chairs have to help us out in making sure that there is a conducive policy environment for us to operate properly as civil society organizations. And the second one is financing. And I think that's also very important. You mentioned a little bit, Ayman, as well, the figures. I want to go even more back. 2015, almost more than 62% of the 3RPs was funded. Now we're looking at around 20 something, 23. This is very important. The more the funding is shrinking, the more we need to prioritize. And prioritization, I think it's extremely important when we look at inclusion. How do we target populations? How do we support populations? Which parts of the population are we supporting? And to do that, and this is where I'm going to close, I think the most important thing is to focus on accountability for the 3RPs and for their response. We are accountable to Syrian people, and we need to make sure that all our solutions come from Syrian people and from host communities. Protection interventions are extremely important. This is what Syrians are telling us, and also interventions that allow for Syrians to be more financially included in the different countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being so short. Yet you have identified also two important things: the need for political solutions and accountability. And I think everyone here agrees that to be more efficient, you need accountability. We will conclude the panel discussion and we will move to take some interventions from the floor. I have to start with participants who have registered to speak. We start with Firas Othman. Firas is a Syrian refugee. He is also a DACA student. And I want to explain more how significant it is to have this scholarship and what is your appeal to the panelists here and the other people who are there.
Yes. First of all, my name is Firas Othman. I'm a DACA scholar, and I'm a new member of the Tertiary Refugee Student Network. I'm very thankful for being invited to this important discussion. I'm mainly here to deliver the voices and the perspective of many young Syrian refugees, which is a thing I've been doing for quite some time. But this event is more special to me because it marks the 13th anniversary of the Syrian crisis. And 13 years is a long time, and long times make it necessary to start looking for long-term sustainable solutions to support young refugees. And from the perspective of young refugees, what can be these long-term sustainable solutions? I would say one is supporting their access to higher education, because by data, it ensures self-reliance and self-sufficiency of these refugees. And unfortunately, we've been witnessing a continuous drop of the amounts of funds for refugee scholarships. Two, I would say, developing refugees' vocational and technical skills that would allow them to pursue non-traditional office jobs, hence again, more sustainable self-reliance. And the third, and the most important one from the perspective of young refugees is trying to find a dynamic in which governments and hosting countries in this region can perceive refugees as an asset, not as a burden. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of young, ambitious, and talented refugees who have given the chance, they will, and embraced and not restricted, they will contribute to the advancing of the economic growth in the countries they are residing in. And after 50 years, I think it's time to see these young refugees and invest in their abilities and their talents to make a positive change in the countries they are residing in. And you might say these are just basic recommendations or basic suggestions, but I believe if you try to invite more refugees to the conversation and have more open dialogue with them, you will have more accurate and effective solutions. And let me tell you this, as someone who participated in the Global Refugee Forum, I can assure you that refugees are eager to be part of the solution. They are working on the ground to support other refugees, to support even the local youth in their hosting countries. So I think these are the things that, from the perspective of young refugees, are necessary and should be prioritized to move forward and make any productive progress in the future. I would say I would leave it there as my brief introduction and my brief intervention.
Firas, thank you so much. Not only you were brief, but you were very clear on the priorities and on the needs. You really have made your case very logically, reasonably strong, and it makes sense, but it's not happening yet. So let's hope that moving forward, we can make this case we'll keep in mind, and that we will find ways to make it happen, because as you said, refugees are eager to be part of the solution, and if they're given the chance, they can be. I will move now to a virtual intervention from Imran Reza. Imran is the UN Deputy Special Coordinator for Lebanon and UN Resident Coordinator Office. We welcome Imran, especially that he's in Lebanon, where the landscape is very complex and getting more complicated, with more than 90,000 people now displaced, in addition to the Syrian refugees and other refugees in Lebanon. Imran, welcome to this discussion. I give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity and for being able to see some people I haven't seen in ages, even if it's online at this point. I think we've been saying for years that we need to face the challenges that we're seeing right now in a different way. And in terms of Lebanon, for the last 3-4 years, we've talked about multiple compounding crises that have made it more complicated. And certainly since October 8th, we are now reaching some 90,000 displaced from what's been happening in the south. And this is all in the context of the ability to respond being much more difficult, institutional weakness in Lebanon that is extremely well known, and the reasons for it as well. Deteriorated basic services and worries about stability. So in that context, and in terms of what's been said already about 13 years, about a reduction in resources available, in terms of trying to be as efficient as possible, we have thought to learn the lessons from the LCRP, which is, of course, the Lebanon country chapter of the 3RP. And what it has been doing, especially over the last few years, which is responding to increased needs on the part of Lebanese as well, not just in terms of Syrians. And it has managed to reach some 2 million vulnerable Syrians, Lebanese, and Palestine refugees as well. So moving ahead for 2024, we have tried to shift the paradigm to adopt a new integrated humanitarian and stabilization framework. So taking what was in the ERP, separately from the LCRP, putting them together and responding to needs across all populations, with also an emphasis on being ready to respond to emergencies, which we keep seeing evolve in this situation. So this is the Lebanon response plan that I hope all of you have heard about, and that we hope to launch very, very quickly soon. And it will again respond also and sort of give us the chance to move towards national development objectives, towards working with the government on this and having their ownership. So it is about basically Lebanon's long-term peace and security, development, and very much leaving no one behind, and having a very, very joint approach at this time that is much more threatening and fragile than it has been for quite some time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hamran. Leaving no one behind. Thanks for bringing it to the conversation, because that's a central theme to the 3RP structure and advocacy and approach. We will host again to Lebanon. We are hosting Ivo Friedrichsen. He is the UNHCR representative in Lebanon, and he is managing a very complex situation with a new challenge every single day. Ivo. We don't have Ivo. Okay. Julian?
I can.
You can hear us? Maybe I'm wrong.
I'm here. Thank you, Rula. Good morning, colleagues. Very fitting, and I think in line with the context that I speak after Imran, because indeed we have a very close partnership previously already, but definitely as we go forward within the framework of the LRP Imran introduced. I just want to again hammer home the message we said a lot, that vulnerable populations, but definitely refugees in Lebanon, are caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place. And that we should indeed not underestimate the importance of sustained assistance in this context as a mitigating measure, whilst of course we collectively need to pursue the very difficult durable solutions, which requires all of action in domains beyond the humanitarian sphere. Conversely, if we see funding further declining, and there is of course a lot of concern in the community here, we're going to have to face and together analyze what the consequences, the strategic ramifications are going to be. We see definitely more cost and complexity. There will be increased reliance on negative coping mechanisms. But from a refugee protection point of view, of course, our ability to have leverage vis-a-vis increasingly disgruntled Lebanese stakeholders is going to become smaller. it will be more difficult to ask Lebanon, the Lebanese, to stay the course and act as a responsible, relatively welcoming member state. And that is something that we need to take very seriously. And again, think what the consequences are of this trend, should it indeed continue. The year ahead, if we briefly look forward, we see an increasingly tense environment where it will be increasingly key, even more than before, that we work together across the assistance spectrum, the assistance community, but also visibly with the authorities to provide as much assistance across population groups. That is needed for these population groups that have increased needs, but again, also as a measure to ensure that we maintain as much of the protection space as possible. Prioritization has already been mentioned. I think the Lebanon community has set an extremely good example. And again, we pay tribute to the coordination team that has worked on the LRP and all contributing entities, the sectors, and so on and so forth, to bring the price tag down very, very considerably. So we end up with a much leaner and more realistic plan. The Lebanon response plan, which is the Lebanon chapter that supports the 3RP at the regional level. We hope, of course, fervently in this very difficult context that has been described already by many speakers before me, that we actually will be able to execute the plans as and operations as explained in this document, and that we will not be put further on our back feet through further deterioration of the sub-regional, but also the Lebanon context, which will require that we put contingency planning and emergency response plans into higher gear. But that again is then immediately linked again to our funding situation and posture. We have done a lot already in the South. We are doing quite a bit, but the ability to step up further at scale will require much more additional funding. And we should not make the mistake to divert even more funding from other serious needs in other parts of the country, because that would just be robbing Peter to pay Paul. So that is a potential context that we will have to grapple with. Fingers crossed that it is not going to materialize. Thank you for your attention and looking forward to the rest of the proceedings.
Thank you very much, Ivo. And you just outlined a very impossible formula where to ensure the protection space for refugees, you need to expand your assistance and support across the country to host communities and other populations, and you don't have the funding. And I'm looking at Robert. We're going to face a very difficult year, and I think the challenges, we haven't seen even the peak of the challenges. What's happening in Gaza will have still unfolding. The war is not over, and we may see even more complications and consequences that will make it even more difficult. We will go back to Amman now. We are back in Amman. With us is Ms. Saad Jerbawi. She is the International Rescue Committee IRC Regional Vice President for Men. And I give her the floor.
Thank you, Rona. Thank you. I have 10 pages of notes.
No.
I'm kidding. First, thank you for having the International Rescue Committee here. IRC is a member of the steering committee. By virtue of being a member of steering committee, I must support what UNHCR and UNDP said about sustaining the Syrian refugee response. And in all seriousness, the debates and deliberations we have in the steering committee are heated because of the situation that we find ourselves in terms of prioritization and how do we do what feels the unethical in cutting support to those that need it by the equation of who's more vulnerable. So things have not been pleasant in our steering committee meetings as of late. Like many of us around the table, we've been involved in the Syria crisis since 2012. IRC works in the Northeast, Northwest, and in all of the refugee hosting countries, inclusive of Turkey. We just ran a multi-sector needs assessment, and one of the most stark findings was that households are in greater debt today in Syria than they were a while back. The assessment looked at 3,000 households in 5 governorates, and 89% of the households in Northeast and 84% in the households of Northwest indicated that they're in debt. And it's because of lack of income as well as rising prices, given the context in Syria. So we all know that the situation is getting worse. We also know that there's no political solution on the horizon. Ayman rightfully alluded to the fact that Syrian families are not intending to return to Syria. We know that voluntary, dignified, and safe returns are not on the cards. That leaves us with the impossible situation of needing to work with host governments, different communities, and different formulations, as well as civil society. And in all of this, we aspire for Syrians to be self-reliant and resilient, as if they have a magic wand to become self-reliant and resilient. And in an era where we are talking about efficiencies and prioritization, that is not going to be the result. And so there is for us, and similar to what Ivo said, there is an onus on us to figure out how we work differently, not only efficiently. Our sector is always premised on servicing a household and then thinking about the community and then looking at the systems whereby they exist. The formula now is forcing us to look at it in reverse order. How do we work with the system to service communities, to be able to service households? And that's not an easy formula. This is the premise of the 3RP. This is the premise of durable solutions. But in order for it to succeed, it does require inclusivity, as Giovanni said. The inclusivity not only of the Syrian community, but of the donors, right? And right now, as you see, we're premised in this meeting talking of us to you, when in reality, we should be speaking together about how do we take this challenge on. In order for us to succeed, we need to be removing impediments. Host governments in the region did not and have never declared being a melting pot. They've made that always clear. And yet we're expecting them to be a melting pot. And that doesn't work. And so what is it that we're going to be doing together to change the policy world in order for us to be able to serve?
So what will work?
What will work? Come on. One last thing. Yes, one last thing that I wanted to say is to Dr. Abdullah's point. We said that we're focused on the Syria crisis, and it is right that we're focused on the Syria crisis. We can't forget what's happening in OPT at the moment. We have seen a failure of our international systems. We have seen a failure of our principles in serving Palestinians. The precedent of defunding UNRWA is very dangerous because it's a precedent that says refugee rights are on the table and can be cut whenever we want. I think our obligation here, be it moral or in accordance to our systems that we operate in, is to make that not a precedent and to ensure that Syrian refugees are not going to face the same predicament as Palestinians in the future. To answer your question, Rula, it is really working through the system. It's working through governance without getting caught up in Syria about, is this early recovery, or are we normalizing, or are we doing development? We need to step away from that mentality, and we need to be working with hosting governments on how does the system level allow for inclusion without maybe integration, right? And that's the formula that's needed.
Thank you very much for these insights and for your frankness. I think we all need it, especially when we're talking about accountability. Our last speaker is Diana Garde. She's the head of the UNFPA Regional Humanitarian Hub for Syria. She's not our last speaker. She's our one before last speaker. And she is going to be here with us. Here she is. We haven't met, but nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Do I need a mic or?
No,
Okay,
it's picking up.
wonderful.
This is just for that camera.
Thank you. So let me first thank you for the opportunity. And I wanted to offer a statement on behalf of Layla Baker, who's our UNFPA Regional Director, who sends her regrets for not being here today. But if we're looking at the strategic overview for 2024, approximately 48% of the targeted population are women and girls. And we have made efforts towards addressing their needs, but this particular demographic, we're seeing challenges. And they are in themselves seeing escalating risks and vulnerabilities. So we wanted to just highlight this and underline it for the way forward as we have these discussions. We are receiving reports from Syrian women and girls in refugee communities of gender-based violence incidents. So this is increasing. That includes harassment, sexual exploitation and abuse, sexual assault, and child enforced marriages. And if we talk about child enforced marriages, in some of the communities that we're looking at, the prevalence is reaching 30%. So we just want to underscore the acute vulnerability of adolescent girls. We're hearing also reports of increasing barriers to quality sexual and reproductive health care. So this is more stigma. We're seeing a lack of awareness. We're seeing family restrictions. So a bit of a rollback in some of the progress that we've made in previous years towards gender equality. And then, of course, we're looking at the economic downturn and escalating tensions across the region, which everybody's been highlighting. This is exacerbating this particular situation. So if we reflect for a moment on the 3RP strategic direction 1, this is around protection of people. And so we think that it's very imperative that in our response strategies, we are not only protecting people, but we're also protecting access to services for those people. And we want to see a continued partnership, as has already been mentioned, between agencies towards this goal. I think our ask in this moment is that we not forget to bring the voices of women and girls to the table. This is imperative. They can be the decision makers. They can contribute towards the strategies for the region. And while we recognize the very significant needs, and I might say the increasing needs, we also want to recognize the strength and the resilience of the refugee population and their contributions towards durable solutions. And so this way, if we can all work together, we can better support the well-being and empowerment of women and girls in this setting and in crises such as these across the region. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's not good news to hear. But if just one small question, if you can just clarify when you spoke about increase in gender-based violence in refugee camps, which refugee camps?
So the hub, the UNFPA hub here in Amman, works in all 3RP countries and in the 3 hubs inside Syria proper. And we do an annual assessment, impact assessment, and these are the words. It's largely qualitative evidence that we're gathering, but this is largely from the mouths of women and girls across the sub-region. So we're happy to share a link to the 2023 version for anybody who's interested.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your work. Thank you. Our last speaker is Alessandro Fracastiti, and he is the UNDP Egypt President Representative. Actually, you don't need it.
Okay, thank you very much. Just trying to put some comments, also connecting it to the statements that were made up earlier, both in terms of inclusivity, custody in action, stressing consequences, and so on. So Egypt obviously has a much lower amount of Syrian refugees there. For a long time, we have had a situation where it has been an unfunded operation. UNHCR has done most of the work there, I have to say, over the years. But we also now have a multiplicity of crises, an overlapping crisis in Egypt. So in that sense, I wanted to comment on the custody in action. Along with UNHCR and in the 3RP framework, we are really looking at resilience-based development as a critical and relevant strategy for the country, as it now struggles to also take care not only of the existing Syrian refugees, but also of over 400,000 Syrian refugees. And the government, in that sense, made a request to us to put together such an integrated resilience program. And I think this program we think it's uniquely positioned to address these complex multi-layered crises, or at least partly help with them. These include economic challenges, of course, integration challenges, social resilience for the whole country, economic issues, climate change impact, and the pressure of core costs associated with hosting refugees. So the approach includes, of course, support to the refugees as well as host communities and vulnerable groups, and contribute to strengthening socioeconomic stability and preventing the further overstressing of local service delivery and public infrastructure. So the response to the question of cost of inaction and on the consequences, clearly today in Egypt, it's really uncertain if the country is not supported in what would be the consequence on. This is a joint work with UNDP and HCR, co-leadership of the Egypt Resilience Response Plan, the Refugee Coordination Mechanism, and the development of the Resilience Technical Working Group, ensuring the mainstreaming of the resilience-based development approach throughout the coordinated response, while pursuing a one refugee approach and resilience and for all, and building on the government ask and the overall approach of the 3RP mechanism. I'll just finish with the three areas that are also in the GRF pledges that has been emphasized for donors, and those are first to enhance the socioeconomic inclusion of refugees and asylum seekers, the forced displacement, peace building, and post-conflict reconstruction and development, and addressing the
Thank you very much, and thanks for being short. I'm told we have time for one more intervention from a virtual one, and it's going to be from Turkey, and it's Mr. Nidor Dragisiki. I apologize for not pronouncing it right. He's the Deputy Resident Representative, UNDP Turkey. I think we have him online.
Yes, thank you. You're having me online. I just need to switch the different. Hello, everyone. Yes, you have me online. I need to switch from to the different mode in order to participate virtually. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak and to provide a bit more information about the situation in Turkey, as my predecessors also mentioned, and I will use the word of my colleague Alessandro. We are here facing multiple or the overlap of the crisis.
Excuse me, sorry, with apologies, we're not hearing you well. If you can, I think it's from your end.
Can you hear me now? Any better?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to be very quick. From the side of Turkey, I would like to just emphasize that we are now facing a bit of multiple of the crisis, I think, situation, especially in the region which is bordering with Syria. As you are aware, we have encountered the devastating earthquakes in February last year with a tragic loss of more than 50,000 lives. And then, according to some preliminary damage and cost assessment, the even partial damage and what has been lost is about $103 billion. It affected approximately 15 million individuals, out of which 1.7 million of the total of 3.6 or 7 million of Syrians under temporary protection actually reside in this particular region. So it is basically half of the refugee population in Turkey. We all know that the situation has affected negatively the refugee populations which are residing there, and due to informal nature of their livelihood, access has exacerbated their vulnerabilities. And they, of course, we all know, confront limited access to livelihoods, and then now even more deteriorating living conditions in the aftermath of the Turkey. This is why we believe that the overall recovery efforts, which are ongoing here in Turkey, we believe that support to refugees need to be seen as an integral part of the overall response to the devastations caused by the earthquakes. Currently, in this region, UNDP implements a number of different projects that could provide livelihoods opportunities to the affected Turkish population, but also Syrian refugees as well. We are focusing on economic empowerment, restoring social protection and services, also on the other side, management of debris and some of the limited actions in the protection of cultural heritage. Through the contacts with individuals in these impacted regions, it has been observed that people are not solely looking for the assistance, immediate assistance. Yes, there are still protracted humanitarian needs, but also they are also willing to start and eager to start and revamp their economic activities to move on. For example, in one of the calls for small grants, we have received more than 20,000 applications. We will be able only to grant a quarter of it, some 5,000, but it indicates the desire of the people, inclusive of Syrian refugees, to basically have more durable solutions, to be able to generate income, so to create some kind of more sustainable conditions for their lives. This is why we believe also that the support that is going to be provided is going to slowly transit from humanitarian to development efforts. And in this regard, we would be supporting the individuals and companies, because we all know how sophisticated, diversified, and developed the Turkey private sector is, to resume the business and to, of course, support public institutions which are engaged in providing basic services and to assist vulnerable populations, including both refugees and Turkish citizens. I would like to emphasize, and this is to conclude, that we might need to discuss also the future prospects of the 3RP coordination mechanism, having in mind the new needs and to factor in the aftermath of the devastating earthquakes that happen in Turkey and slow transition from humanitarian to early recovery and then further development in the EQ region. But also we need to factor in the different processes which are internal to Turkey, such as, for example, the development of the new cooperation framework, which should start this year. And in this light, perhaps look into more lighter, more efficient coordination solutions. Again, having in mind also the needs in the region, but also changed situation in the region, which now
I apologize, but
I'm finishing. Just to which require basically more presence in the field to tackle communities which were devastated by the earthquake, both Turkish and Syrian refugees communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, we're supposed to have a Q&A session. We are already past our time, but I think maybe we can have 2 or 3 questions very quickly, and then we can also shorten our closing remarks. Any questions from the floor? Please go ahead.
You talk about microphone?
Yeah, because there are microphones here.
Thank you very much for this extremely somehow depressing but frank conversation. I would echo Blue by saying, as you know, we all live in a political environment, be it the local one and our back home environment. So, I mean, all the arguments you give us, the whole explanation you give us is extremely useful. I would just like to, because, you know, I cover the whole region except Egypt, but we focus a lot on Syria. We have this whole of Syria approach, and now maybe because I'm not too familiar with how you work in the 3RP coordination mechanism, but one of the things we see is that if you have reduced funding, you have to adapt the coordination structure somehow. You can't continue spending as much in coordination if you have less money for it. So I just would like to hear you on how you see this 3RP structure and going forward, and you know, just as a donor perspective. But otherwise, really, it was extremely useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and it's a very legitimate question, especially when we're talking about accountability. We'll take one more question, and then maybe Ayman and Abdullah can address this question. Any further questions? Please go ahead.
It kind of builds on what Karim was saying, actually, that I think when resources are stretched, especially in a complex context, the question where to put the money is important, but also who to give the money to. I think this kind of builds on knowing which actors are agile in responding and which know firsthand which responses are working and which responses are not working. I think especially in an environment where the DRD has been successful in increasing access to services, but we all know that access to legal protection is really complicated. That all the efforts that we're making to train resilience, next to what they're saying, if we don't keep the protection environment, are less likely to succeed. Meaning there are fewer prospects for durable solutions, even if there is progress inside Syria and more options basically. So especially looking at an environment where now we're also seeing focus on economic recovery and more development thinking, and we know that those that are displaced and are not part of the core population of the country that is taking out a loan for a grant, for example, will be forgotten if we don't push for their inclusion. I think this question becomes even more important. So I would like to put that back into the room, that it's not just about the what and the how much, but and where we put it, but also who.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to these two questions?
Part of my response to these questions were part of my closing remarks, which is if you want, I can do that.
Yes, please.
Just to cut it short, because we're running out of time. Look, first of all, please don't confuse coordination on Syria proper with the 3RP, because it's a different jungle over there. We have attempted and lobbied some of my NGO partners and some UN agencies know. We have questioned also the viability of the whole of Syria. We asked for this to be reviewed. We don't have a whole lot of time to spend in these meetings, and in between Northeast and Northwest and government control, and add on all the cross-border, and so that's a world in its own of the coordination structure. I think it's beyond time to try and review that. Frankly, when we suggested that, Martin Griffiths said the pushback came from donors. So I don't know which is key, but certainly the structure is sustainable, right, and needs to be looked into. But that's not my decision. I will go to the 3RP, and here, as you know, we have discussed with all the partners that something needs to change. Either we need to rebrand, collapse certain structures, we need to look at country chapters, we need to see what the future of the 3RP looks like. There is sufficient positive contributions here that it needs to remain a central strategic, planning platform with clear indicators and one-stop shop, as Rob put it. But it doesn't mean that it can be more agile, less heavy on its bureaucracy and so on. We're looking into all of that. As you know, Iraq left for the obvious reason of Iraq being a successful relay country from humanitarian to a more sustainable programs, not requiring chapter in the HRP. We did look, the next candidate was perhaps Egypt, but we needed a special case study there. And that leaves us with the big chunks who are on TV, like Imran and Ivo, to see really how would that look like in the case of Lebanon and in Jordan. Or should we look at not country chapters, but something that would serve the purposes of that one-stop shop central coordination without having to go into the greater level of detail, leaving each country to have its own and draw down from that chapeau details into the country programs. We're looking into all of that because, as you know, we've done an evaluation, and that kind of set in motion these kind of conversations to see where are we heading with this. Certainly 2-3 years from now, it's not going to be looking at what it looks today. The thing is, we need to consult with all the partners, and the PRP is quite a large group, and we need to make sure that the contribution comes from everybody. The difficulty I have with all of this is that there are those who are diehard, it should remain as is. There are those who really don't see added value, and there is the vast majority who are in the middle. And we're just trying to reach a consensus with everybody else. What is the best way forward? So that's why it's taken us time, but we are in the thick of it right now in the consultations to see how should it look like by the end of 24 next year, given the declining resources, the overwhelming number of agencies. That's another thing that has been questioned, which is to answer your question into, planning programs. Do we look at joint programming, combine some of these initiatives and look at single source of funding rather than, but then don't forget that we have NGO partners and donor partners, and these have also unique relations, and we have to respect all of that. So it's not an easy task. We have to just navigate all these politics, if you wish. But the fact of the matter is, it has to remain a very flexible, agile coordination mechanism that remains fit for the purpose of the phase we're in, not for the previous purposes that it was planned for. And in fact, it was in one of my points which I wanted to close. So that's really the next phase in the, but please don't put the two together. The HRP in Syria and the 3RP are always trying, we try our best to coordinate together, but the coordination structures are rather different.
Thank you very much, Ayman. I think you've made it clear that it has to remain flexible, agile, and fit for the phase we are going through now. I give the floor to Dr. Dardari for the closing remarks.
Whoa. I may not be very politically correct in what I'm going to say, so please bear with me. We misunderstood the HDP nexus. We thought it was a linear exercise. So we start with humanitarian assistance, and then after some time, we move into development and hopefully people. It didn't work out. So I'm just imagining if we started from day one working on the economic self-reliance of Syrian refugees in a way to contribute to the growth and prosperity of Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, and Egypt, and Iran. We should not repeat it again. If there is another crisis now, we shouldn't spend 10 years focusing on humanitarian assistance. But we need to combine humanitarian assistance with development. Because only that combination can then graduate people from reliance on humanitarian in order to be ready to be self-reliant and contribute. So nobody is talking about integration. Let's be very clear about that. But economic inclusion is in fact, I mean, countries do investment promotion every day, trying to bring people to invest in their countries. So we should have thought in this business model from 2011. And I can assure you, again, as an economist, that the result on the Jordanian economy and the Lebanese economy would have been dramatically different had we started with that. Because people think that humanitarian and development work are mutually exclusive. They are not. The 3RP is an example that we can work together and we can combine humanitarian assistance back to back with development assistance and then start graduating people from humanitarian into development instead of waiting 10 years to be where we are today. That's on the refugee side. So I think it was, despite we are proud, Ayman and I are proud of what we have been doing, but both of us realized that in hindsight now, we should have maybe designed things differently. And if we don't learn the lesson, that would be the big disaster. So from now on, we need to be very different. And that may require then a different weight, a different structure of the coordination and all of that. But we need to agree first on this political decision. What type of assistance are we offering? Have we decided that we want refugees to graduate from the reliance on humanitarian assistance and to move into self-reliance as contributors to the countries, to their host countries? That's a huge different strategy. That's one. And again, I would like to, you may know more than I do, that Syrian refugees moved inside Syria 5 times before leaving the country. And if you ask, and I asked, and I have been in this business long enough to, the main reason for moving around, in addition to security and safety, of course, was education and electricity. And of course, we didn't invest in those because politically it was impossible to do so. And we didn't even invest in local agriculture, in a country that was the only net exporter of food in the Arab region. So we used food aid, and that was important. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying as a critique of, it's a criticism, it's a critique, but not a criticism. So what do we have now? We don't have enough money for food aid, and the agricultural system is decimated in the country. From a country that was self-reliant, exporting wheat across the region, And I was responsible for the decisions to export meat to Jordan and to Egypt and to Algeria when they were running out of reserves. Syria was the only place that provided that emergency support in wheat to the countries of the region. Now that is decimated completely. And we don't have enough money to provide food aid. So we need to think about this. Can we continue doing this for how long? Funding will go down. It is going down, it's never going to go up again. So what about financing? Right? What about leveraging? What about economic self-reliance? And so on and so forth. So I would like to just close my remarks by saying, smart people are the ones who learn from their past and experience. And the peoples of this region are themselves are the fortune of this region, are the treasures of this region. And our job is to make sure that those treasures work together very well. Not as a burden only, but as a great asset. This young man is an example. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dabiri. Thank you for our co-chairs, for our panelists, our speakers. Thank you for being clear, honest, and frank. It was a useful discussion, I think. We definitely pointed what are the difficult questions, but obviously we are all squeezed between a rock and a hard place, and especially refugees and the host country. So I'm sure the conversation will continue. Thank you very much, and hopefully next year we will see some kind of change that will take us on the right.